Every year, thousands of businesses disappear forever. Most people assume they failed because they weren't good enough. But that's rarely how markets work. Markets don't carefully choose the best companies to survive. They simply keep removing those that can't survive the next wave. And if that's true, then business has never been a competition to become the strongest. It has always been a competition to avoid being eliminated. From the moment we learn about business, we're taught to believe it's a competition. The company with the best product wins. The smartest founder wins. The fastest growing startup wins. We celebrate innovation, talent, and bold ambition because those are the stories that dominate headlines. When a company succeeds, we study what it did right. When another disappears, we assume it simply wasn't good enough. It sounds logical. After all, that's how competitions work. The strongest outperform the rest, and the winners rise to the top. But markets don't behave like competitions. A competition ends when someone wins. A market never does. It keeps changing, disrupting, expanding, collapsing, and reinventing itself. Every recession, every technological breakthrough, every shift in consumer behavior creates another wave that forces businesses to prove one thing, not whether they're the best, but whether they can survive what comes next. And that difference changes everything. The real game isn't becoming the strongest company in the market. It's surviving a market that never stops eliminating companies. That's the difference most people never see. We often imagine success as a ladder, where businesses climb higher by outperforming everyone else. But markets don't operate like ladders. They behave more like a relentless filter. Every economic downturn, every technological shift, every change in consumer behavior quietly removes another group of businesses from the game. The companies we admire today weren't simply chosen because they were better. They were the ones that survived enough rounds of elimination to accumulate advantages that no newcomer could build overnight: experience, trust, loyal customers, stronger systems, deeper capital, and years of learning from mistakes. In other words, strength is rarely what keeps a business alive. More often, surviving is what eventually makes a business strong. And once you see the market through that lens, you'll realize something that completely changes the way you think about business. The first objective is never growth. It's earning the right to still be here when the next wave arrives. This is Mind Over System, where we explore the hidden systems behind business, money, and the rules that shape success. The biggest misunderstanding about business begins with a simple assumption that it's a competition. It sounds obvious. Companies compete for customers, talent, market share, and attention. So naturally, we assume business works like a race where the fastest, smartest, or strongest eventually wins. But every competition has something the market doesn't: an ending. A competition is designed to produce a winner. When someone crosses the finish line, the game is over. Markets never work that way. They don't stop. They don't declare champions. They don't freeze the rankings. They keep moving. New technologies emerge. Consumer behavior changes. Economic conditions shift. Regulations evolve. Every change reshapes the environment, forcing businesses to face a completely different game than the one they mastered before. That's why market leaders don't disappear because the race ended. They disappear because the game changed. The mistake isn't believing that business is competitive. It is. The mistake is believing that competition is the goal. It isn't. The market isn't asking whether you're better than your competitors today. It's asking a much simpler question. Will you still be here when the next round begins? Because in business, surviving one round is what gives you the opportunity to play the next. And no company has ever won a game it was no longer around to play. When people look at companies like Apple, Amazon, or Microsoft, they usually reach the same conclusion. They survived because they were stronger. At first glance, that seems perfectly reasonable. But what if we're confusing the outcome with the cause? Think about what happens every year. Thousands of businesses disappear. Not because they were incapable. Not because someone else was dramatically better. Many simply run out of cash, expand too quickly, misread the timing, or fail to adapt before the next shift arrives. They leave the game before they ever have the chance to improve. The companies that survive another year gain something their competitors never will: more experience, more customer trust, more operational knowledge, more financial resilience. Every year they remain in the market, those advantages compound. Over time, what began as survival starts to look like strength. That's why dominant companies often seem impossible to catch. Not because they started miles ahead, but because they've had years, even decades, to accumulate advantages that only time can create. Strength, then, isn't always the reason a business survives. More often, it's the reward for surviving long enough. Once you understand how markets actually work, your priorities begin to change. Most businesses spend their energy asking, how do we grow faster? But that's often the wrong question. Growth only matters if you're still around to enjoy it. The better question is, what keeps us in the game? Because every year your business survives, you earn something far more valuable than short-term growth. You earn another opportunity to learn, another opportunity to adapt, another opportunity to build trust, another opportunity to strengthen your position while others disappear. That's why the first objective in business isn't to become the biggest. It isn't to become the smartest. It isn't even to become the fastest. It's simply to make sure you live long enough for all of those advantages to compound. Because every round you survive makes the next round slightly easier. And every competitor who disappears makes the game slightly less crowded. Eventually, people will look at your business and call it successful. They'll admire your strength. They'll study your strategy. But what they rarely see is that your greatest advantage wasn't brilliance. It was that you were still standing after everyone else had left. History is full of companies that seemed unstoppable until the market changed. And history is equally full of companies that looked ordinary for years before quietly becoming dominant. The difference usually wasn't a single brilliant decision. It was survival. Every recession removed another group of competitors. Every technological shift forced another group to start over. Every market correction rewarded the businesses that had enough resilience to stay alive while others disappeared. Looking back, it's easy to mistake the survivors for the strongest. But that's because history only remembers the companies that made it through. It rarely remembers the thousands that were eliminated along the way. And that's exactly what creates the illusion that success belongs only to the best. Sometimes, success simply belongs to those who were still there when everyone else was gone. Imagine two companies launching in the same industry at the exact same time. The first grows aggressively. It borrows heavily, hires quickly, expands into new markets, and chases every opportunity it sees. The second grows more slowly. It protects its cash, adapts carefully, and avoids decisions that could end the business overnight. For the first few years, the faster company looks like the obvious winner. It dominates the headlines. It attracts investors. It appears unstoppable. Then the market changes. A recession arrives. Customer demand slows. Funding becomes scarce. Suddenly, the strategy that fueled rapid growth becomes the very thing that threatens its survival. Meanwhile, the slower company is still standing. Not because it was more ambitious, not because it was more innovative, but because it built its business to survive a game that never stops changing. Years later, people look at the company that remains and call it successful. What they don't see is that its greatest competitive advantage wasn't growing faster. It was surviving longer. If this principle applies to one business, it applies to every market. Every industry goes through the same cycle. New competitors enter. Competition intensifies. Margins shrink. Some businesses adapt. Others disappear. Then the cycle begins again. What looks like growth from the outside is often a continuous process of elimination underneath. That's why the companies that dominate an industry rarely become dominant overnight. Their position is built one survival cycle at a time. The longer this process continues, the harder it becomes for new competitors to catch up. Not because the leaders stop making mistakes, but because every round they survive leaves them with more experience, more trust, more resources, and fewer rivals. This is why markets become increasingly concentrated over time. Not because they are designed to create monopolies, but because surviving repeated waves of change naturally concentrates advantages in the hands of those who remain. Once you see that pattern, you stop asking why the biggest companies are so difficult to replace. The better question is, how many rounds of elimination did they survive before anyone noticed their strength? The market doesn't create winners. It reveals survivors. What we call success is often just a visible result of an invisible process of elimination. That's why people admire strength but overlook endurance. They see the company that remained. They never see the thousands that quietly disappeared. The greatest advantage in business isn't being impossible to defeat. It's being impossible to remove. If you believe business is about defeating competitors, you'll spend every day trying to move faster than everyone else. But if you understand that business is a process of continuous elimination, your priorities change. You stop chasing every opportunity. You stop optimizing only for growth. Instead, you optimize for longevity. Because the first victory in business isn't becoming number one. It's earning the right to compete again tomorrow. The greatest businesses in history weren't built in a single breakthrough. They were carved out by every crisis they refused to disappear in. That's why the market has never been searching for the strongest company. It has always been searching for the next company to eliminate. The rest simply become what we later call the strongest.